Con nosotros el señor John Landis.
Primero que nos cuentes un poco acerca de tu infancia, porque todos sabemos de tu amor por el cine en general, todos sabemos que te gusta mucho el cine de terror, que te gustan mucho los monstruos, que te gustan mucho los gorilas, particularmente los gorilas, diría, mucho los gorilas.
Joe Dante has, he says, I have a rule, which is any movie with a man in a gorilla suit is a good movie.
Esta es la regla.
Which I think is also true in life. No, I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents, I was born in Chicago, but my parents moved to Los Angeles when I was 2 months old. And in terms of film, or motion pictures, you have to call it now because it's no longer just film. But in terms of the movies, I was born in 1950, so I grew up with television. And I always loved movies, and my advantage, the advantage I have, which I realize now, is that I knew from the time I was very little what I wanted to do. Anyway, I saw almost everybody, if you ask them their favorite movie, or what movie, you know, what movies do they love or something, if you talk about a seminal movie, if you ask someone, they almost always can tell you what cinema they saw it in and who they saw it with, because the enjoyment or the pleasure from a movie comes entirely, it's completely subjective. And it comes from who you are when you see that film and where you see that film. So often it's how old are you, what's your experience, who you're with. I mean, movies are very unique, and every movie-going experience is different. And when I was 8 years old, I saw a film in Los Angeles called The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which is a film by Ray Harryhausen, directed by Nathan Duran, but Ray Harryhausen, who just passed away, but Ray was a brilliant stop-motion animator who's unique because he's a technician, basically, a special effects guy, but Ray is the auteur of his movies. You can say a Ray Harryhausen movie and you know what you mean. Anyway, I saw that film and I had what's called suspension of disbelief.
No quise interrumpir a ninguno de los dos, pero les pido un aplauso para el querido Ray Harryhausen, un maestro verdadero, alguien a quien admiramos mucho.
But I was enchanted by the movie. I had the perfect movie-going experience. I loved it. And I went home and asked my mother, I said, who does that? Who makes the movie? And she said, the director, which was very sophisticated of her, because she could have said the prop guy, that's what I'd grow up to be. But she said the director. So from the time I was 8 years old, that's what I wanted to do, was make movies. So that was a big advantage. I think most people really don't figure out what they want to be until they're much older. So what else do you want to know?
That's it.
That's it.
Gracias a todos.
Buenas noches. No, so from the time I was little, that I really wanted to learn about movies and basically be near production, just do what I can. And because I grew up in Los Angeles, I had no relatives in the film business or anything, but it was Hollywood. I mean, it's where the industry had been for 40 years by then. So I was able to seek out and meet filmmakers. So as a young kid, I was able to meet Howard Hawks and Frank Capra and Hal Roach and Alan Dwan and everybody. Sam Fuller, what? Hitchcock. Well, Hitchcock, not much later. I met Hitchcock. But you were able to seek the people out and meet them. And then when I was old enough, which was 17, which is the law, I was I left school. I was bad in school anyway, but I left school, I just quit and became a mail boy at 20th Century Fox Studios. Anyway, so I got a job at 20th Century Fox, and just to be near filmmaking. And it was, it's interesting because I started in the studios during the death of the studios, really. In '67, it was, you know, Hollywood was changing and dying, basically. And so, I mean, when I was at Fox, a very interesting time because they made Hello, Dolly and MASH and Beneath the Planet of the Apes and Patton and Tora, Tora, Tora and all these different kinds of movies. It's kind of, think about it, they made Tora, Tora, Tora and MASH the same year. So it's a time of great change and still big old-fashioned musicals like Hello, Dolly. And it was great for me because also on the Pico lot, which is still there on Pico in West LA, they were making a lot of television. So Irwin Allen was a producer and they were shooting Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, The Time Tunnel, The Green Hornet, Batman. So there were always lobster men and, you know, Monster of the Week and gorillas and just crazy and cowboys. And you know when you see old movies and they show studios and there's always showgirls and Nazis and knights, and it was just like that. It really was. It was great.
Okay.
But so it was very exciting, and I got to be on a lot of sets, and that's what I wanted to do, was be near film. And John Chambers, makeup artist who did famously Planet of the Apes, the prosthetics in Planet of the Apes. I used to hang out in the makeup room because I thought it was so cool. And in fact, it was interesting. You know the movie Argo? Because I knew all about that at the time. Because he would do disguises for the CIA and the FBI, and it was very cool. By the way, Argo is completely accurate, except at the end when they go to the airport. In real life, they went to the airport, they got on the plane and left. There was no chase or anything like that. Anyway, but John Chambers, just a good story. He was a very nice guy and big man. In fact, he acts in my first film, Schlock. He's the National Guard captain, John Chambers. Anyway, John, one day, he called me and I said, yes. He said, I want you to take this. He gave me a jar, a big like mayonnaise glass jar. And in it was all these weird pieces of foam rubber. Weird, like, what is that? And he said, just do me a favor and take this. And he gave me a woman's name, a secretary, in the main administration building. Just give it to her. Don't give it to anyone else. And I said, what is it? He said, none of your business. So I took the jar and I thought, what the fuck? What is this? And I took it up to the administration building and I found this woman. She was a woman in her late 50s, secretary. And I said, here, this is from, oh, thank you so much. And I couldn't stand. I said, what is that? What are the? And she said, well, I'll tell you, but you must please be discreet. Okay. So she took me to the ladies' room, to the bathroom, shook me in, and she showed me. She opened it and she took out, it was like this squiggly piece of foam with a flat piece. And she went like this and took off from her face. She had a huge hole from an accident. Big hole carved out. It was hideous in her face. I mean, really like a monster movie. It was a hideous thing. And John had made a mold and had these foam pieces, and she took it out and she put the new one in and then put makeup over it. Disappeared. So being at the studio was very exciting for me because I was around filmmaking and met amazing people. I mean, George Cukor, Robert Altman, a lot of people were shooting, you know, making pictures. And the great George Stevens made a film mostly in Paris, even though it took place in Las Vegas, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Warren Beatty, bad film, called The Only Game in Town. But they were shooting pickups on the lot. So George Stevens was coming. I was like, and George Stevens, I'll never forget, he's walking across, an older man, and you know, I'm 17. And at that time, it was different time. To become a male, I used to have long hair. To become a male boy, I had to cut my hair short and wear a tie. You know, it's like if you were an actor, a director, or a writer, you could have long hair. But if you were, you know. And, but George Stevens was walking with his AD, with his first assistant. And I went, excuse me, Mr. Stevens. And he looked at me. I looked 12, you know, and he said, what? And I said, I'm just such an admirer of yours. I just wanted, you know, to meet you. And it's, you got to remember, it's 1967. So what's interesting, and if you're a younger person, you wouldn't know this, but the first cinest generation, people like Marty Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Francis Coppola, Steven Spielberg, all those guys, George Lucas, and all those guys, you know, Peter Bogdanovich, they were nerds. They were the guys. They were the guys who brought the projectors into the class. You know, the audio-visual guys. It was not chic to want to be a director, but who the fuck? What? Who cares? You know, it was in France, where some young guys like Truffaut, Godard, you know, Louis Malle, all those Cahiers de Cinema guys, and then in England, the Sight and Sound, Lindsay Anderson, Carol Reese, all those guys, they were the ones who looked at American filmmakers like John Ford, Howard Hawks, and said these men were artists. In America, they were just working guys. It's a very different point of view. And it's funny now, because now to be a director is so chic, is so groovy. Then you were a nerd. You were like, you know. So that's the whole thing with Spielberg. It's Revenge of the Nerds is what it is. So when I went to George Stevens and I said, I'm such a fan, he looked at me. I was a 17-year-old American. And he went, name 5 movies I directed. So I went, Alice Adams, Giant, American Tragedy. You know, I'm thinking, and I did, a Shane. You know, I named off 5 movies that he directed. And he was so impressed. He couldn't believe it. He looked at me and he said, you're not French. The true story. It's hard to relate to now, but it's absolutely a true story, because he thought, that's amazing. And he took me to lunch. And, because, you know, George Stevens was a cameraman for Laurel and Hardy. You know, I mean, amazing career. Anyway, so it was very exciting for me to be there. I was there almost, about a year almost. And I tried to meet as many filmmakers as I could. And there was a man named Andrew Martin. Andrew Martin, or Bundy was his name. He was American, but he was a Hungarian director who started at UFA in Germany and made Silence, and then, like many, fled Hitler and came to Hollywood. He was at MGM for probably 40 years. He directed many movies you've seen, King Solomon's Mines, I mean, many. And Bundy became famous as a second unit director, meaning action director. So he directed The Chariot Race in Ben-Hur. He directed all the fighting in Cleopatra. He directed 155 Days of Peking. The Longest Day, there's an American, a German, and a British director. He's the American director. He did The Landing. He was famous for action. So he was hired to do all the flying action in a Mike Nichols film called Catch-22, which is a great film. Has anyone ever seen Catch-22? It's a remarkable film. Anyway, and he said to me, you want a job on the unit? Yes, please. So I went down to Baja, to San Carlos in Guaymas, Mexico, to work on Catch-22. And they had Paramount, when they made Catch-22, had the 4th largest air force in the world. And they had something like 29 B-25s, which are these bombers, these big World War II planes that were held together with Scotch tape and rubber bands. They were, how they fought a war in these things, I don't know. And we did all these, if you see the movie, the flying is incredible, the takeoff, it's all real. And I spent about 4 weeks down there working in the belly of a B-25 going, Bandero es roja, Bandero es verde. That was a horrible job. And the planes, when they flew like this. And after 2 hours in a plane, you'd land and your nipples and your jaws would hurt just from that. It was horrible. And I hated it because I was learning nothing about filmmaking.
Okay, sure.
A lot about B-25s, but nothing, you know. And it was terrible because Mike Nichols, you know, was down there with all these amazing, you know, Orson Welles and Jack Gilford and, you know, all these incredible actors, Alan Arkin and John Voight, and amazing. And David Watkin, the great DP, who was crazy, this British director of photography. And I was in a B-25. So I quit and went back to the mailroom because I saw more production there. Anyway, So I went back to the mailroom, and then Bundy, same guy, Andrew Martin, got a job on a film that eventually was released as Kelly's Heroes. What was that called here?
Kelly's Heroes?
With Clint Eastwood, yeah. And that was going to be made in Yugoslavia, and Bundy said, this is 1969, and Bundy said, I can't promise you a job, but if you can get to Belgrade, maybe I can get you on the second unit. So I lied. I told my mother I had a job on this movie. And at that time, as a mailboy, I was paid, I think, $58 a week. And so by that time, and Catch-22, I probably had maybe $1,200 saved. And to buy a ticket, one-way TWA, which doesn't exist anymore, but TWA, one-way, Los Angeles, London, was $800. And so I bought a ticket, and I showed my mother. I said, look, I have a ticket. So she went, must be true. So I flew to London. I was completely an idiot. You know, I'm thinking, I get to London, excuse me, how far is it to Belgrade? You know, like what? And it took me like 3 weeks to get there because, and in 1969, it meant something, the Iron Curtain. Really did. You went from color to black and white. It was quite something. And there were some Swedish, Italian, and British hippies who taught me how to, what's called ride the rails.
Ride the rails?
Yeah, you go under a train. Oh. You hold on, like,
yeah, sure,
you know,
yeah.
right? I don't think you can do it anymore, but you could do it then. And you used to take your belt, and you'd put your belt so if you fell asleep, you wouldn't die, you know. And so I actually went under the Iron Curtain and got to Belgrade. But I got to Belgrade, and luckily for me, but unluckily for MGM, it was about 6 to 7 weeks before filming. They were in pre-production, and the production was a complete fuck-up. There was British grips, Italian, gosh, I'm trying to think, British grips, Italian wardrobe, French makeup and hair, German and Austrian special effects, pyrotechnics, a guy named Carly Baumgartner, who they called Carly Boom Boom, and he did The Longest Day. He did all these big, you know, Where Eagles Dare. If you ever see Kelly's Heroes, we blew up Yugoslavia. I mean, it's amazing. And Tito sold MGM a town called Visionada, which we blew up. Have you ever seen Kelly? And it's supposed to be French, you know. And so anyway, I got on that movie, and the crew was very international. The great Gabriel Figueroa, who you're doing a tribute to Gabby, he was the cameraman, Mexican cameraman. How the fuck that happened, I have no idea. But he was wonderful. He was in his 70s then, and he never used, this is old when they were still using arcs before HMI, so big arcs and the old Panavision cameras, you know, big cameras. And Gabby never used a meter, ever. We're doing big night exteriors. He would hold his hand up, and he'd look at the back of the light on his hand, and he had the focus puller and the loader, the operator, were two Mexicans, Pablo Rios and Danny Lopez. They looked like Olmec carvings. These guys were completely Mayan. They just looked amazing, round heads, round bodies, and they were brilliant and lovely people. And the other operator was Bruce Surtees, Robert Surtees, who went on to become a very famous photographer. He did Lenny and many great films. So it was an international crew, lots of Yugoslavs, an American director, and they all hated each other. But they all liked me. So I became indispensable on the unit. And I spent 9 months working on Kelly's Heroes in Yugoslavia. It was probably the best time of my life, because I had all the pleasure of a huge movie and none of the responsibility.
Sure.
Gabriel Figueroa was wonderful and very funny. And you know what, you don't really talk about it in your thing, in your book, but Gabby he was one like Cantinflas. He was a very rich communist. You know, he was like, he was very brave in the unions, creating the unions in Mexico, because the film business in Mexico, like Hong Kong, was gangsters. You know, so he was very strong in creating the unions. And then he became one of the owners of Chuparusco and became very rich commie, Gabby. But because he was so socially active, he couldn't work in the United States. But he was such a great cameraman, great, that whenever American movies were shot in Mexico, he shot the movies of John Ford, John Huston, Don Siegel. I mean, they all wanted to use Gabby so that when they made pictures of Mexico. And of course, he shot all of Luis Buñuel's Mexican films, Exterminating Angel, Los Illuminados. Great artist and a very funny person, and I really enjoyed him. So I got to meet amazing people. And plus there were these actors, you know, Donald Sutherland, Telly Savalas, Don Rickles, Harry Dean Stanton, all these guys, Clint Eastwood, and they're all in Yugoslavia behind the Iron Curtain for 9 months going crazy because there's nothing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, you can tell them while we were making Kelly's Heroes, there, we landed on the moon. There was Chappaquiddick, Charles Manson, Woodstock. I mean, all this stuff is going on, but it was like we were on another planet. We were on planet Tito. Anyway, so I was on Kelly's Heroes. It was really great experience. It was wonderful. And not for MGM, but for me, it was wonderful. And after, it was 1969, so at that time in Spain, Franco, like all good fascists, understood the power of movies. It's like, who created the first film festival? Mussolini.
El primer festival de cine
Venezia, Venice is the first film festival, and he built Cinecittà. It's like Hitler with, oof, I mean, they understood. So Franco let it be known that if production came to Spain, he would make it easy, he would make it cheap, and he'd give you the army, and you know, it would be easy to shoot there. So many films started being made in Spain. Things like Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia, and all, of course, the Italians started making what are now called spaghetti westerns. They used to be shot in the north of Italy, but many went to a town called Almeria, which was, when I was there, was a shithole in the desert. There was nothing there. Now it kind of looks a little like a Miami, but then there was nothing there. And a guy named Jim O'Rourke, who I met on the...
What's his name?
Jim O'Rourke.
O'Rourke.
Who I met on Kelly's Heroes. He said, let's go to Spain and see if we can get work on movies, because so many movies. In Almeria, the year that I lived in Spain, in mostly in Almeria, but also Madrid, there were over 400 movies made there. French, Italian, German, Spanish, American, British, everybody was making movies there, and mostly Italians. There'd be days where you'd have 15 companies shooting. So it was great because you could work on movies. They would hire you, and I worked on many, many movies, and I've done every job you can do on a film except hair. Oh, okay. So you had opportunities. First of all, I spoke English, so I did a lot of dialogue coach, which was fun, because you had guys, you know, cowboys who talked like Chico Marx, you know. And one of the movies, I told Pablo because I like this story, but one of the movies I worked on for almost a month, I became a stunt man. And I literally became a stunt man because Jim O'Rourke and I went for a job, and this production manager said, "Can you do horse falls?" And Jim went, "Of course, yes, absolutely." And I'm like, and the next day, ah! But I became very good at falling off a horse. You see me die in about 150 movies. So I was doing stunts on a movie that you know as Once Upon a Time in the West. So it was directed by Sergio Leone, and I was a big Leone. He was very funny too. He was a big man, and he spoke English with this thick accent. And Henry Fonda, who was one, you know, I was very excited, Henry Fonda, and Sergio would call him Hank, which he couldn't say. So he'd go, Anka, Anka. It was very funny. Anyway, I worked on that movie, and by the way, last week was the Governor's Ball. It's a banquet that the Academy of Motion Picture Art gives. My wife is now on the board of governors of the Academy, and she got an honorary Oscar for the great Italian designer Piero Tosi. So we were there with Claudia Cardinale, who came to get the Oscar. The last time I saw Claudia Cardinale was on Once Upon a Time in the West. But anyway, the story that I just want to tell you, and then I'll stop, is there were two young guys on the set of Once Upon a Time in the West. They shot some of it in the United States, in Monument Valley, most of it in Albuquerque. But the two writers of the screenplay, and they were young Italian film critics from Rome. And they were young guys. They were two or maybe 5 or 8 years older than me, not that old. And they were so excited because, you know, all these amazing actors, and it was so exciting to be there. And I used to hang out with them because they were just so happy. And you know who they were? Bernardo Bertolucci and Dario Argento. I always wondered what happened to them. Anyway, so I had I came back to the United States after I was gone about over 2 years, and I did many jobs working as a writer and as a stuntman. You see me in Towering Inferno, they set me on fire and throw me through a window. I worked on many movies as a writer, many movies, and I finally made my own movies, and here I am.
Thank you. You make it.
Thank you, sir.
Bueno, primero, antes que nada, buenas tardes, bienvenido. Quiero saber qué recuerdo tiene del desaparecido John Belushi y si tiene alguna anécdota interesante para contar del set.
John Belushi was wonderful. He was an absolutely wonderful person and a wonderful actor. It's funny because people say that, you know, they think of John as fat, but he actually wasn't. He was a football star in college. He was Albanian. And we used to say he was strong like tractor, smart like bull. But he was fabulous, and he became addicted to cocaine, and it killed him. And I'm still angry about it. So if you have friends who use drugs, tell them, stop. And the problem with someone who's addicted to alcohol or drugs or whatever they're addicted to, food, whatever it is you can't do anything about it. They have to do it. And John was wonderfully funny and wonderfully warm and sweet and very professional. Animal House, we only had him like 2 days a week because he was commuting. We were shooting in Oregon, and he was doing Saturday Night Live in New York, 3,000 miles away. So he would be there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday morning, he would fly from New York to Los Angeles, and then fly from Los Angeles to Portland, and then drive from Portland to Eugene, so he'd get to us Sunday night, go to sleep, and then we'd work with him Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning he would drive, back to Portland, fly to Los Angeles, fly to New York. So we did the movie. If you see Animal House, it's interesting because John just has really great entrances and exits, It's like designed because he wasn't there. But I loved him and I enjoyed working with him. On Blues Brothers, his drug habit grew increasingly worse. So it became difficult, very difficult. And quite candidly, I'm shocked he lived as long as he did because he really abused his body. But I loved him. I mean, he was a wonderful person. And a story from, I don't know what, I tell you a story from the set. And just a John's story is we're shooting in Chicago on the Blues Brothers and shooting all nights. And John disappeared. Like, where is he? We were out in Harvey, Illinois, some suburb. We don't know, where is he? So Danny Aykroyd said, well, I'll find him. And he went up, we were, a suburban neighborhood, he knocks on doors. It's like 2 in the morning. He's like, excuse me, have you seen John Belushi? And like the third house, the guy goes, oh yeah, he came in, he ate dinner and he's asleep on the couch.
Hola John, ¿cómo estás? Te quería preguntar si habías leído lo que había dicho George Lucas y Spielberg sobre una probable implosión de la industria cinematográfica americana debido a la desproporcionada plata que se pone...
Sobre la economía de la actividad cinematográfica.
Sí.
Sí.
¿Y qué te parece ahora la industria, teniendo en cuenta que has visto surgir el formato del blockbuster?
Yeah, the problem, you have to understand that there are many problems, and they all stem from the internet. Because the studios now, what you call Hollywood, which doesn't exist anymore, these are all small subdivisions of huge multinational corporations. And the economics have completely changed. And so it's now common, for instance, to spend more money selling a movie than making a movie. And everything's changed. It's just changing. And one of the reasons is what's called globalization. So, for instance, there used to be big domestic film businesses. Argentina, Mexico, Japan. There were many countries had their own movies, and Argentinians went to see those movies, you know, and they don't anymore. And they don't do it in Korea, they don't do it in South Africa, they don't do it in Paris. You know, in Paris, the government forces a certain number of French movies to be made. They force it because the French aren't interested. So it's a very strange phenomenon when you make a movie that has to open at the same time in Beijing and Rio de Janeiro and Chicago and Toronto and Rome and Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's a bizarre thing because what it means is more explosions, less dialogue, more special effects, movies that translate, simple. And one of the problems is selling a movie. How do you get people in the theater? It's a very different, it's just a changing business. And it's because there are many reasons, but part of it is theft. The internet, you have generations, including you, who think when you download something for free, it's not theft. And you have businesses, Google, YouTube, they couldn't exist without piracy. That's their business model. Fucking people. And so, but it's true. So it's a very difficult time, and the studios don't know, you know, they're like floundering. They don't know what to do. And it's hard. And I don't know what's the answer. I don't have an answer. But you understand that it's what Spielberg and Lucas were talking about, were just instead of making 15 movies, they make one movie. You know, they put all their eggs in one basket, which is probably stupid. But it's a weird time. And it's hard for filmmakers, too. That's the irony. It's easier than ever to make a movie, but it's harder than ever to get it seen. It's, you know, I wish I had an answer. If you look at, Steve Jobs decided, I think a song is worth this much money. And he destroyed the music business. Because now nobody buys albums. They buy a song, and they buy it for 15 cents. You know, so it's just, everything's changing, and I don't know what's going to happen. And what I do know is nothing replaces the cinematic experience. Going to see a movie in a big house, whether it's a comedy or a Western or a horror film, I think it's an incredible experience. And I hope that we don't lose that.
Hola. Bueno, quisiera saber qué consejo podría darnos a los estudiantes que nos estamos iniciando en este mundo del cine que es tan maravilloso y que quisiéramos también algún día poder hacer nuestras propias películas. Gracias.
Make a movie. You know that one of the things about the new technology that's so interesting is when I was growing up and I wanted to make movies, I made 8mm movies, and then I made 16mm movies, and it was expensive and clumsy and difficult. Now anybody can fucking, with an iPhone, you can make a movie, you know? And what's interesting about it is, what I find, so when I do talk to film schools, what upsets me is the ignorance of film history. In terms of, I'm shocked when I say to people, you know, have you ever seen Treasure of Sierra Madre or Casablanca? Or, you know, no. And you go, no? Or they've never seen Buster Keaton. You go, what? You know, I mean, it's important to see movies. And not just movies from 20 years ago. See movies from 100 years ago. That people don't see silent film. And do you know there's nothing in cinema that wasn't done by 1930? Nothing. So you should see movies. I mean, there's so many great films, Japanese films, Argentine films, Mexican films, American films, so many great films from all over the world, and try to see them. And not on your fucking television, you know. But if that's the only way, then that's the only way. But that's one. And two, write scripts. I mean, that's the hardest thing to find is what's called good material, a good screenplay. Most screenplays are bad. Most movies are bad. But by the way, most clothes are bad. Most cars are bad. It's the way things are, you know. So when something is extraordinary, you see it. And what a lot of young people do is they write their script or they have their project and they put all their faith in it. And then they get cynical and disillusioned because they get shit on, which is what happens. And they give up. And if you give up, then you shouldn't have done it in the first place. And all I can remind you, I wrote An American Werewolf in London in 1969 in Yugoslavia. I made it in 1980. And I only got to make it because I'd made some successful movies. But seriously, make some shorts, make some movies, and write some movies. And you know the biggest thing, and you're going to think this is weird, but the biggest thing is read books. I'm shocked, not about movies, novels, classic literature, Mark Twain, Ernest Hemingway, Cervantes. I mean, read great books. Philip Roth. I'm shocked when I deal with students, and they're just fucking illiterate. You know, they don't know who anybody. I mean, you go like, what? I mean, they haven't read anything. Dickens. I mean, read this shit. It's great. They're busy reading Twilight. You know, it's like there's so many great books because what you'll learn is narrative structure. You know, but I'm not joking when I say make a movie because now you have, there's no excuses anymore. You can make a little film. You know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Why not? Actually, I'm going to tell you my last story, and because it's a good story. Because I was just thinking, I was throwing authors, and I realized Borges. You can read them in Spanish, for Christ's sake. But I know I have a good story, and then we can stop. But a good story, which I was making a silly movie called Three Amigos, which they're showing Saturday, he said. I like that movie, it's very funny. There's a Mexican actor in it named Alfonso Arau, who plays the bad guy, El Guapo. He's also a director, he's a very talented man. And when we made the movie, we were shooting in Tucson, Arizona, in the Saguaro National Forest with the cactus, you know, like the Roadrunner cartoons. Anyway, Alfonso was married to a woman then, named Laura Escobar. And Laura, I knew she spoke English, but she never said anything. And finally, one day at dinner, I said, how come you don't say anything? I know you understand, I know you speak English, why don't you say anything? And so she told me a story. And the story was, when she married Alfonso, they'd been married about 11 or 12 years. When they got married, I think he's on his 8th wife now or something. I don't know. He marries a lot, but he's a scoundrel, bandit, Alfonso. Anyway, when they got married, they went to an astrologer in Mexico City, and she read their tea leaves. You know, she made their charts, and the astrologer said, you know, reading this stuff, she said, I forgot the number, but on your 14th wedding anniversary, you, Lara, will write a book, and it will become the most successful book in Mexican literature. And then Alfonso will make a movie of the book, and it will become the most successful Mexican movie. So she said, I'm thinking. So whenever it was, 3 years later, or whenever it was, she sat down to write, and she said, I don't know what to write. And Alfonso said, you're a good cook, write a cookbook. So she wrote Like Water for Chocolate. That's a true story.
De verdad, ¿eh?
Bueno, te quería preguntar sobre esta serie ya de culto, ¿no? Que duró 2 temporadas, Maestros del Horror.
Ah, sí.
Sí, quiero que me cuentes un poco la experiencia de eso.
Masters of Horror was Mick Garris, who is a friend of mine, when I met Mick Garris, I was preparing Animal House at Universal, and he was doing publicity for Star Wars. His job was to work the remote control R2-D2 at, premieres and things. But Mick went on to be a publicist and then a writer, screenwriter, and then a director. And he's done very well. He's Stephen King's anointed. He does all of Stephen's movies on television and stuff. Anyway, Mick had a dinner in Los Angeles. And he invited, it was David Cronenberg, John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, Stuart Gordon, Larry Cohen, Wes Craven, Bill Malone, Don Coscarelli, Who? Guillermo del Toro, Eli Roth. There were a lot of people. And it was very fun. They're pretty silly guys. And it was all very fun. And Mick said, gee, we should do a TV series together. And everyone went, absolutely, because we knew he'd never get the money. And he then came back a year later and said, okay, Showtime wants to do it. And the reason and what's his name? Miike, the Japanese.
Takashi Miike.
Takashi Miike, who's very funny. Although his Masters of Horror was so weird, they wouldn't show it on television. You can get it on DVD, it's weird. Anyway, so the deal was that we had to shoot it in Vancouver, Canada. We had 10 days to shoot and $800,000, and you could do anything you wanted as long as it was horrible. And it was fun, and we did 2 years of it. I did 2, and John Carpenter, most of us did 2. The end. The name Masters of Horror came about because at this dinner, we've had a number of dinners since then, about twice a year, something pretty silly. And we've had the weirdest people, Wim Wenders, Peter Medek, Costa Gavras, just a bunch of crazy, it's always odd and always fun. And it came about, the name came because the table next to us at a restaurant, the woman was having a birthday, and the waiters all sang happy birthday. And Guillermo del Toro stood up and he said, happy birthday from the Masters of Horror. And it became a joke because it was like, the Masters of Horror want coffee. And it's funny that I'm a master of horror. I've made 29, 30 movies. 2 of them were horror films.
Bueno, le quería preguntar si el hecho de que sus películas de los 90 no hayan tenido la misma recepción que la de los 80, él cree que se debe a porque hubo un cambio en el público, porque el público cambió, no encontró lo que quería ver, o porque quizás la industria le boicoteó la mayoría de sus proyectos.
The industry boycotted the project? I don't know. That's a strange question. The most successful film I ever made was 1990. That was Coming to America. But mostly I've done television in the last few years. And the last thing I did on television would not come here, called Mr. Warmth, that wouldn't be here. It was a documentary on Don Rickles, for which I won an Emmy, and it was very successful, but it's not a box office, it's HBO. So mostly I've been very lucky that I've made some movies that made a lot of money. So I don't have to work. But the truth is I like to work and I enjoy it and I like shooting. The problem is, and it's a problem that not just me, but many filmmakers are having, is the studios now are making first of all, fewer movies, and second of all, I'm not interested in making Thor. The last studio film I was offered was Thor. And I read the script and I went, I want to spend 2 years of my life making this? I don't think so. But the truth is, a lot of stuff that I like, the studios wouldn't make. And half the movies I've made would never get made now, whether they were successful or not. Why, you got some money? Want to invest in a movie?
Antes que nada te quería agradecer por Un Príncipe en Nueva York, porque fue una de las primeras películas que marcó mi infancia. También te... Gracias. También te quería decir que... O sea, yo hace mucho tiempo que vi un hombre lobo americano en Londres. Y... O sea, es impresionante la primera transformación que sufre el personaje, que cómo se representa el dolor y el sufrimiento del personaje ante tamaña experiencia. Y hoy en día en películas de terror que implica este tipo de transformaciones con temas de animaciones por computadora u otro tipo de tecnología, ya no se puede apreciar eso. Es por eso que para mí es muy diferente ver La Cosa de Carpenter que la última que se estrenó.
Well, people often ask me about CG. CG is fantastic, but like any tool, it depends how it's done. I mean, when you see CG and it works, you're not aware of it. It's not a question of practical versus, all that stuff. It just, Rick Baker said a funny thing. We went together and saw one of the Underworld movies. And, he said that the lesson of the movie to a filmmaker is just because you can have 50 werewolves, run across the top of the ceiling doesn't mean you should. But it depends. I mean, I think that CG is fantastic. It's just, it has to be done well and done cleverly. And the problem is, special effects have gotten so sophisticated that it's hard to impress an audience. I mean, it's how many times have we seen cities destroyed? You see thousands of people being killed and you go, oh, you don't care. It's a problem. No, I'm serious. It's a problem. Like the new Superman, I hated that movie. But there's times when CG's great. It just depends on the filmmaker and how they use it. Go away.
Váyanse.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Whoa. Thank you. Gracias.